event is taking place as part of the Race, Empire, and the Pre-Raphaelites British Art Network Research Group, which is funded by the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Arts, Tate, and Arts Council England. And the purpose of this network has been to reframe 19th century art and design through the lenses of decoloniality and anti-racism. And one of the outputs that we will be creating as part of this network will be a toolkit for museum practitioners with significant 19th century collections to tackle these issues in a very critical way. And it's with this ethos in mind that we're delighted to be having this event today, where we have got an amazing lineup of 4 artists who respond directly to issues of 19th century art, design, and empire in their work. So just to give you a brief run-up of the event, we will be starting with the artist presentations, Bharti Parmar, Sunil Gupta, Belinda Kazim Kaminsky, Farwa Moladina, and that will be followed by a 20-minute chair discussion by Dr. Anna Arabinden Kessen. At 12, we will be having a comfort break, followed by breakout sessions starting at 12:10. And all participants should have received the guidelines, but we will be sharing those again at 12:10, just to refresh your memories and so we're all on the same page about things. The event will start to wind up at 12:40, so we'll have groups feeding back, a few closing words, and then we'll end at 1 today. And something that I would just add is that we've got, let's say, a code of ethics for our group, which is that we ask all white members of the group to be conscious of their own positionality with respect to race, empire, and privilege. And we ask that you take that into consideration in the breakout rooms, but also when phrasing your questions for the chair discussion at the end of the artist talks. And just looking ahead, our next event, if I can move on to the next slide. Is it working? Here you go. Just a little save the date before we get started. On the 25th of June, our next event will be a lecture, a conversation between Hugh Locke and Matt Smith on Victorian ceramics and empire. We see Hugh Locke's fantastic souvenir number 9 on the right, and this will be chaired by Dr. Sadia Qureshi. So do put that date in your diaries. More information forthcoming on our social media. And if you're interested in joining the group or want to learn more about our activities, please email us here. This is our email address. We've got a blog up, a website with the blog, and that is our Twitter handle. So I will stop sharing now and hand things over to Kate.
Fab. Thanks so much, Sabrina. And I'm just going to introduce Dr. Anna Arabinden Kessen, who's going to be chairing the first session. So Anna is an assistant professor of Black diaspora art with a going appointment in African American Studies and Art and Archaeology at Princeton University. Her first book, Black Bodies, White Gold, Art, Cotton and Commerce, pictured here in the Atlantic World, is published by Duke University Press, and she's also the director of Art HX, a digital humanities project examining the intersection of art, colonial medicine and race. We're really delighted to have Anna chairing this panel. Her work is so interesting in the way in which it uses contemporary art as a way of rethinking 19th century art. So we're really excited to have Anna's perspectives, and her book is available in paperback now as well. So it just arrived for me yesterday, but I think we'll have lots of interesting discussions and a really, lots of good questions be raised. So Anna, I'll hand over to you if you want to introduce our first speakers.
Thank you so much to Kate and Sabrina and Rupali. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be in dialogue with these amazing artists, some of whom I think I've met before, Barty, at least via email, others who I know by name. And before I begin with introductions, I do just want to say that I'm coming to you from the lands of the unceded lands of the Ilap, the Wadandi, Noongar people of Southwest Australia, and I want to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and future, and I also want to acknowledge any First Nations people who are joining us today. So it's my great pleasure to begin by introducing to you all Barty Parmar, and she'll be speaking today on a paper called A Grammar of Sentiment. And Barty trained in printmaking at the Royal College of Art, and she has a PhD in fine art from the University of Wolverhampton. She is co-editor of the Bloomsbury Encyclopedia World Textiles, the Volume 4 Colour, which is a 10-volume 2-year project. And today she'll be reflecting on her doctoral research using Owen Jones' seminal design manual of 1856, A Grammar of Ornament, as a springboard to explore themes of taxonomy and materiality in her work. So please join me in welcoming Barty.
Thank you for the introduction, Anna. I'm just going to share my screen now. Can we all see that? Yes. I'm delighted to be able to speak on this panel today, and I'd like to use this opportunity to reflect on my research archive from some years ago, in fact, my PhD project of almost 15 years, and speak to the question we're asking today, which is how are contemporary artists of colour engaging with 19th century art, design, and empire in their practice? I'm going to present a very brief visual walkthrough of circular themes which have informed my studio practice over the last 25, 30 years or so. Before we begin, I want to highlight this cover image of a catalogue, an exhibition catalogue called Secret Victorians. And it's an exhibition I saw at the Minories, Colchester, 23 years ago, and it's also an exhibition that toured to the Icon in Birmingham. And it's an exhibition of contemporary artists such as Cara Walker, Helen Chadwick, Simon Perroton, who reflect on the legacy of the Victorian age through themes such as plant collecting, colonialism, sexuality, silhouettes, etc. And this was a real turning point for me, both in my studio work and in my academic research. I've titled my talk A Grammar of Sentiment, referring to the title of my doctoral thesis, which was a study of Victorian sentimental jewellery towards making new art about love and loss. And it makes knowing and pertinent reference to Owen Jones's seminal design manual of 1856, The Grammar of Ornament. Jones developed key principles for the newly established Government School of Design, which later became the Royal College of Art, and looked to the Islamic world for inspiration. So I'd like to explore themes of Victorian affect and sentimentality and its various material expressions through the worn artifact, the garment, and the production of art. If I could begin by reflecting on some definitions. What does grammar mean to me in my research? The OED's definition of grammar refers to structural concepts of word forms, order, and rules of usage. Owen Jones clearly saw potential for clever appropriation of the term grammar to describe the taxonomy and principles of design. The grammar of my title alludes to the visual codes, the systems and languages at work in the codification of emotion within the objects of my interest. For this presentation, I've organised my thoughts into 4 interconnected themes: the stitch, the hand, the garment, the material. So what does my work look like? I'm concerned with method, materiality and metaphor, slowness, the vernacular, the naming of things, and the subversion of historic craft processes to comment on the present. These artistic expressions often take the form of printmaking, photography, embroidery, and sculptural interventions, sometimes with non-standard materials. So although I'll speak to the material culture of institutions, I'll be talking primarily from the perspective of the artist. So we're slightly outside of the Victorian date parameters here, but we're looking at an embroidered sampler by Elizabeth Parker from the collection of the V&A. And it's large as samplers go, and I'll try an attempt to describe what it's about. It's a personal narrative, a history, a political document through the work of the hand, and a labour of love. And she draws us in from the start, and I quote, as I cannot write, I put this down simply and freely as I might speak to a person I can fully trust, end quote. And she describes what she sees as her own weaknesses and sins, and how her employers treated her with cruelty too horrible to mention, and how she was tempted to take her own life. She breaks off mid-sentence with, "What will become of my soul?" In the Lord's Prayer, I use human hair, my hair, and found hair instead of thread. Hair is potent signifier. It has agency. It's a hyper-realistic portrait of the individual, a memorial which surrogates for the self, and various contemporary artists such as Hatoum, Bimji, Gill, who, like myself, have undergone a diasporic experience, use hair as metonymy for addressing issues of identity in the self. The sampler shows the process of its facture. It's in a bespoke frame which reveals the knots, the slippages, and breakages of the palimpsest reverse. It takes 4 years to make. It's a labour of love. It begins identifying myself with black hair, lightening towards the end, marking my time. The purpose of hair within jewellery was to stimulate remembrance and to act as a powerful instrument of evocation. As material expression of emotion, hair has been a long-standing preoccupation of my artistic practice, dead but simultaneously the vital surrogate of the living person. It appears to embody a curious paradox. And when worn against the body when worn against the living body as jewellery, its function is to conjure up the presence of the absent body. Shag develops ideas of the poetics of Victorian jewellery, the ways in which hair stimulates remembrance and tells human stories. Shag is a complex work which attracts and repels in equal measure. It's full of paradoxes. It's gigantic in scale, but its construction involved a painstakingly detailed process. It's a shag pile carpet, but it's fragile. It elicits desire, but also elicits disgust, as attested by its vulgar double-edged title. And it suggests the body through its absence and evokes a sexual, animalistic response in the viewer with its nod towards fetishism and excess. Within the canon of art history, shag may be termed a sensational work, as it raises many interesting questions about slowness, scale, hair and cultural symbolism, art and craft, and also some difficult ones. The uses of hair pieces for chemotherapy patients and other medical conditions, and the misuses of hair during the Holocaust. The work was originally commissioned as an intervention for an architect's space. It is ultimately a work about physicality. This artwork comments on physical space, just as architects fashion space for the physical body to inhabit. It is essentially corporeal. It is of the body, from the body, and for the body. Incidentally, it's the same arm span and height as my body. I'm going to show a very short film now, and you may just want to turn the volume up. What I'm doing is I'm knotting the hair and then pulling to 1 o'clock. And usually the hair wants to go opposite to the way you knot it. And I think that's the way the knots formed. I'll just pull the hairs I've knotted to introduce some tension to make sure they're firm into the lace, and then brush them. And it has a new life every time it's exhibited, as here in a major survey show about hair in art alongside works of Hogarth, Chadwick, and Kathy Prendergast. And also as in this iteration of its showing for the Black Artists and Modernism project at Tate Britain and Chelsea College of Art. After the death of the Prince Consort in 1861, Queen Victoria, Empress of India, memorialised Albert principally in 3 ways. A monument was erected in Hyde Park. Dates and names were inscribed posthumously onto the jewellery that had been presented to her by Albert on anniversaries, birthdays, and so forth. And most interestingly, she wore black. The ritualisation of the Queen's memorial actions provide the historical context of the institutionalisation of sorrow through its manifestation in garments and social codes. In this context, Widow's Weeds is about cloth, its journeying, and how its travels are reflected in its naming. The work comprises a large format photographic triptych with a central text panel enclosed on either side by panels of inverted images of fabric simulating mourning fabric. The overriding characteristic of this work is blackness. Up to 6 yards of fabric could be used in mourning costume. When I speak about this work at conferences, it's presented as a performance. I speak of poetic understandings of blackness, quoting works such as Dylan Thomas. And I wear a black sari because I want to know about being embodied and to feel the folds of 6 yards of fabric. The text comprises 38 alphabetically arranged names of mourning fabrics, contextualized by their geographical, historical, and etymological roots. All crafts and trades have their own vocabularies. Many of my sources derive from William Beck's Draper's Dictionary of 1886 and Henry Yule's Indian Colloquial Dictionary, Hobson Jobson, of the same year. This work has revealed intriguing cultural borrowings, roots, and philological connections between word and thing. I'm going to finish now by describing a project which is very current in my studio, and it's a project about Gandhi, khadi, cotton, and colonialism. This is to be shown during the British Textile Biennial 2021 in October this year at Blackburn Museum and Art Gallery on the 90th anniversary of Gandhi's visit to the town in solidarity with the mill workers. Khadi is the word for a rough Indian paper but also hand-woven homespun cloth, which was adopted as the symbol of the Indian Swadeshi, the Home Rule movement of boycotting English cloth. And this project builds on my ongoing concerns with cloth, geographies, nomenclature, the work of the hand. And it's made in response to the presentation of the history of the cotton industry in Blackburn Museum and recontextualizes the objects in that archive. And it will comprise a film, a series of drawings, and an installation of illuminated punched drawings on black khadi paper. And what's significant about this material is its cultural potency. Sourced in India from 100% cotton rag, it ranges between black to white, and it's made from recycled t-shirts. And to summarize, I'm going to show my final 3 slides without commentary and end with a very short film.
Thank you. That was amazing, Bharti. And that video was very profound. I'm looking forward to our discussions. So I'm very pleased now to introduce our next speaker, Sunil Gupta, who will be delivering a paper called Queer Migrations, a Practice. Sunil is a Canadian citizen born in New Delhi. He has an MA from the Royal College of Art and a PhD from the University of Westminster. He's been involved with independent photography as a critical practice for many years, focusing on race, migration, and queer issues. Thank you, Sunil.
Oh, good morning, everybody. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak this morning. So basically, I'm going to just talk about a singular project, which is called the New Pre-Raphaelites, as it happens. And I'll just briefly touch upon the context and the background to whatever led up to it. So I actually was born and raised in India, in New Delhi, and then migrated to Canada actually when I was about 15 in the late 60s. And then in the 70s, late 70s, I followed somebody to London, and I've pretty much been in the UK ever since, where I got very involved in the 80s with gay liberation and black arts, and in visual arts groups like Autograph and Innova. I was running the first one of the early Innova curating franchises, along with Eddie Chambers, who's doing the other one. And I was heavily invested in that black arts moment. In the 90s, I really got more involved with curating. And I think by the early 2000s, even like some historical moment had kind of passed. I think I turned 50, and I wasn't sure whether what we had worked so hard for 20 years was really getting us much back. So I moved to yet again, but back to live in India, back to Delhi. And it's there that this work took shape. And I'll just share my screen. Did it happen? Yes, let me go for showing the wrong screen. Am I? There we go. So I arrived in New Delhi in 2005 and basically found myself in another situation where my twin interests around photography as an art form and homosexuality and gay rights both needed a lot of work doing for them. And so I got involved very early on with this very young group of people who were coming out of graduate school, who were called Nigar, and they were involved in an interesting cultural activism. So they were using culture as a means of promoting lesbian and gay rights, which was very quickly adopted as queer. So the terminology changed rather rapidly. And I found myself at this sort of great sea change moment, say between 2005 and 8, where a new generation of young Indians was no longer willing to put up with the hypocrisies and the conservatism and the Victorian morality of their parents and the generations before. And homosexuality, which had remained undercover and very unspoken in Indian society and in press, suddenly was being discussed. And this generation wanted, to be free, basically, and they wanted to be free now. They didn't want to wait for decades further. And it's in that kind of moment I was really struck how, when I was back in London on a visit, and I was wandering around the Tate, Britain, and wandered into the Pre-Raphaelites exhibition, that I thought, well, there was a certain kind of similarity in the atmosphere in those paintings to kind of what I thought I was seeing in Delhi. And so I got myself a catalog, went back home. I had the opportunity, the privilege, I guess, of having a studio where I lived in Delhi. And I had a kind of cast of people who were the young activists that I'd been working with, who began to model for me. And then I began to make photographic approximations of some of the paintings based on the reproductions from the catalog. And I'm just going to run you through a bunch of them here. This one, of course, is a facsimile of an earlier one, which is what kicked the whole thing off. A man in a green sari, actually more like Manet's Olympia rather than Pre-Raphaelites. But the original series picture, the first picture I shared with Autograph in London, who then, we had a discussion about this, and they said they would commission me to make 10 of these. And so that really was my trigger and gave me a kind of affirmation and a little bit of money to go ahead. Unfortunately, the first picture I'd taken, the person involved withdrew his consent. So this is another issue that I work with all the time, especially when I'm in the Indian subcontinent, of how to deal with consent for work that's going to be seen largely elsewhere, and people that I'm photographing, how far are they able to give consent, and the whole ethics of these things can become very complicated. In this case, the models were kind of took the scene from me, so I wasn't able to direct them very much. And they did their own kind of enactments. I noticed the series and the Pre-Raphaelites there's enough heads. And so I thought I would embark on some as well. This is one of them, not necessarily based on any singular particular painting, but sort of more in the vein of and this one as well. This was as a kind of companion to the man in the green sari. One of the things that I was very struck with in the early mid-2000s is that having come to India in the 80s to photograph gay men and the lack of a kind of LGBT liberation moment, and why that was so, I was struck by the 2000s that women were very much part of the movement and part of the activism, and were equally willing to model the pictures. This is another one of the heads. The mask in this case was used for the first Pride in Delhi, the Gay Pride. The first one took place in 2008. There was a lot of anxiety around it. The notion of coming out as lesbian or gay in India is a very tricky one. It's one of the stumbling blocks, I think, of why maybe liberation in the Western sense cannot happen, because the whole idea of coming out and declaring some kind of sexual preference in public doesn't sit well in the culture, and people have rethought this pressure to come out. Anyway, a decision was made by the activists involved in setting up Pride that there would be no pressure on people to expose themselves in public. And so we were offering masks to anybody who wanted to wear them. So I tried as far as possible to create and find substitutes for the backgrounds of the paintings, but of course I was limited to just using studio backdrops. But one thing I found in Delhi was that there's an incredible industry of hand-painted backdrops that of course goes back to is a very rich history of high street photography studios and theater and film sets and cinema hoardings that used to all be hand painted, and much of this is going on. You can still go to a market and find people who will paint you a backdrop. So this is again another copy of a painting. This is the Chatterton one. This was more tricky. I had to recreate something three-dimensional with the light. So we went out of the studio actually for this. So as you can see, I was really substituting the kind of more heteronormative couples in the Pre-Raphaelite paintings with a kind of more same-sex pairings, and of course with Indian characters, and presenting them in ways that perhaps they hadn't been seen too much in this fashion in Delhi and Bombay. This one was also based on a painting. This one presented a problem along with the nude woman for display in India. I'm finding there are different moral barriers that appear in different countries and different cultures. So naked women's breasts were not deemed permissible in the gallery or by the gallery, but of course quite permissible in this part of the world. Oh, backwards. This one, of course, has been fine in both places, here and there. Here's another one, which is again a transposition of the painting into a brown gay body. And coming back, this was again also taken from one of the paintings, and I wanted to present again the Indian man as a kind of gentleman, not normally seen like that in India. So I'm just going to end here with the reception it got locally. It was a gamble to put this work out in public. This is 2009. There was a case going on in the High Court in Delhi to legalize homosexuality, meaning to remove the British colonial anti-sodomy laws of 1860. But that hadn't gone through yet. But I was working with a commercial art gallery, actually, Vadera, and they were very supportive, and they said, no, we will show the work. And it got a tremendous response. So on the left, it was reported in the newspapers and reviewed, etc., with the pictures reproduced. And on the right, this is the cover of an Indian art magazine. So I was very impressed that I could show it publicly in India at that time, and that there was quite a lot of interest in it, and people were responding. And the thing that really struck me is that the Pre-Raphaelites which are like a very British set of paintings, seem to have gathered themselves a kind of currency in India, a certain kind of familiarity, not literally, because I don't think many people in my audience have seen the real paintings, because many of them haven't left India. But it's just the way that imagery perhaps circulates in culture and leaves an imprint. And maybe it's through the kind of very anglicized education that Indians have or something, but it certainly seemed to have struck a nerve over there. And of course, the law was changed in 2009. Then it was reverted in 2013. And finally, in 2018, I think it was, that it was the anti-sodomy laws were finally reversed. So I think I'm going to leave you there. And this is just a little story of what I really think I wanted to do, which is to use culture as a kind of activism. So thank you very much. And I'll hand back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Sunil. Those photographs are stunning.
I see.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So I'm going to introduce our third speaker now. And our third speaker is Belinda Kazim Kaminsky, and she'll be speaking or delivering a paper called Haunting. And I'm really excited to hear about Belinda's work. Belinda is a writer and artist living in Vienna. Her work is rooted in Black feminist theory, and she's developed a research-based and process-oriented investigative practice that often deals with archives, specifically with their gaps and blanks. Interlacing the documentary with the fictional, her work manifests themselves through a variety of media and dissect the present of an everlasting colonial past. She's currently a guest professor at the Academy for Media Arts in Cologne. So over to you, Belinda.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation. So, okay, I will just share my screen right away. Let's see if that works. Sabrina, since I see you, can you tell me if everything looks good?
It all looks good. I think you just need to press start.
Okay, yeah. Still, I'm on the wrong page, but I will just, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, thanks again for the invitation. My name is Belinda Kasim Kaminski, and it's an honor to be able to speak in this frame, in the frame of this event, and just to get to know artists and thinkers I have been following from afar since years. So I'm very grateful to the organizers of this event. I guess I should start by sharing a bit about myself, but at the same time, I only have like this 15 minutes. So I would rather like to spend the time talking about my artistic practice. Nevertheless, I guess what is important to share is that I'm based in Vienna. I've lived here for most of my life. And whether I like it or not, the experience of growing up as a Black child in the Austrian countryside has definitely shaped the way I look at life, not only on the level of the experiences that I made, but also when it comes to what this experience taught me, namely how to observe. I still observe, I look, I pay attention to gestures, poses, details on photographs and paintings, but I would say that the observing also comes in when it's about just like everyday situations on trams and subways. Black life in the African diaspora is haunted by looks, by the specter of the white gaze. To be both looked at and categorized, to be, and I quote Frantz Fanon here, to be caught up in legends, stories, history, and above all, historicity, has turned me into a keen observer who uses mediums like text, performance, photography, film, and installation as ways of investigating the ways in which Europeans have looked and keep on looking at the so-called others. I did not come into the field of art via university education. It was only in 2015 that I started a PhD at the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, which I have meanwhile finished. Before I came to art, I came to theory. And in the words of Bell Hooks, I would say I came to theory because I was hurting. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. I saw in theory then a location for healing, end of quote. In my case, the terms art and theory could be used interchangeably. My art production is deeply intertwined with my theory production and the other way around. And I came to both theory and art via activism, which might explain the topics I deal with: representation, the museum, reparation, repatriation, colonial residues, and the archive. My practice is dedicated to something outside of myself, the his, her stories of the marginalized and forgotten, based on a research-based and process-oriented investigative practice, turned into the fictional as well as to the documentary. I'm interested in thinking about the gaps and blanks in public archives and collections. So what I'm working and thinking towards is not inclusion or repair of an otherwise broken system, but a restructuring of relations that are all too often stuck in a binary understanding of the world. Today, I want to share 3 projects with you: Unearthing in Conversation, a short film I did in 2017, some slides of an editing project called Altenberg Edited. It's from, it's always difficult to say because I'm quite slow and I go in circles. So I would say 2017 until I guess I will finish it this year. And the first part of a trilogy, which is not finished yet, it's called The Letter. And this is from 2019. I figured that we will not really have time to watch the films, and therefore I've just prepared some stills for you. These works are closely related to my engagement with archives and museums. In fact, they all started with encounters in museums and archives. So I will turn to the archive first. As said, archives are recurrent spaces in my practice, but what has changed is my way of engaging with them. When I started to think about archives and archiving, I looked at archives as places to turn to with questions, and I expected to get answers there. But my repeated dissatisfaction with what I encountered, or my unfulfilled desire for the voices of the people that I cared about, the ones that had motivated me to go after specific issues, is what made me start to think differently of archives. Meanwhile, I'm no longer turning to the archive expecting to get answers and certainty. Now it is about shedding light on the loose threads, the invisible hands that compile the collection. It is about detecting frictions, my own ambivalences, the many unspoken words or the fragmented stories that will forever be impossible to know completely. And while for a long time this uncertainty has limited what I thought I could say, the voids to me are meanwhile not void, but ways to center the what if or the what could have been. And both are very closely related to the present moment. So turning to these voids and uncertainties enables me to grasp and formulate what keeps me busy, the political and social desires, the things I long for and want to fight for. Part of my repeated returns to the archive or ethnographic museum is due to wanting to understand or to grasp the violence that is at the heart of these spaces. I want to get to terms with repeatedly experiencing what some might consider past, the residues of a past that some of us that to some of us is very present and keeps on popping up in every day in the form of discrimination, exoticization, repeated otherization. Michel Roth-Trullo, in Silencing the Past, Power and the Production of History, reminds us that there is no past detached from the present, and I quote him here. The past is only past because there is a present, just as I can point to something over there only because I am here, but nothing is inherently over there or here. In that sense, the past has no content. The past, or more accurately, pastness, is a position. Thus, in no way can we identify the past as past. End of quote. So the past was, is ongoing. It is, in the words of Saidiya Hartman, a past that has yet to be done. The archive, the museum, is a very specific time space marked by a specific understanding of time built upon power structures that made it possible for these spaces to come into being. In my practice, this is the place from where I start working, a methodology of hunting which aims at facing the violence that structures and orchestrates. I closely follow and shadow the ethnographer, the missionary, the traveler, the researcher, and corner them until what I'm looking for evolves clearly before my eyes. And then, how to represent the violence one encounters, how to represent narratives and vulnerable lives of those whose mistreatment kind of sucked them into the archive, the museum. What do I share? What or whom do I want to spare from a renewed display just for the sake of it? How do I orchestrate possible ways of looking? And these questions are very fundamental when working on, that's very interesting because, yeah, when I worked on Unearthing in Conversation, finally I changed the pages, no? A performance, later short film that I did in 2017. The video is an attempt to come to terms with the affects that followed an encounter with photographs made by the Austro-Czech missionary and ethnographer Paul Sebester in the colony of the Congo in the 1930s. I first saw these images in the frame of an exhibition and then went on to look for them at the Austrian National Library. In the film, Sebastia's photographs serve as entrance point to a negotiation of the lingering effects of colonialism in the past, present, and future by engaging in a conversation with the people on the photographs and the audience that watches the video at the same time. I'm introducing various attempts of disrupting Sebastia's photographs. I cut out, I cover. Still, in the end, I have to accept that nothing I do, neither covering or cutting out, makes the violence of the event and or the pain and haunting go away. Sorry. Something is wrong with my, yeah. With this insight, I returned to what had started my engagement, the moment of encounter that happened when I first saw the images and the affect that was created by looking at the man on the photograph and him looking back at me. I realized that what haunted me was not the violence that was pictured on the photograph, but the ways in which this violence has outlived colonialism as an event. The fact that I am still haunted by events that have taken place in a far different time space than the one I inhabit, again points to an ongoing past. This is the coloniality of the everyday. And seen in this way, encountering archives is not only about the past, but very much about the present and future. Again, the archive is a very specific time space. One question I often ask myself is why archives and museums are so quiet. With all these her stories that are caged within the drawers and shelves, these places should be incredibly loud, and mind you, this is not a pleasant sound. It is a cacophony of voices instead. This whole should be shaken up continuously, as Peggy Piesche, German historian and cultural theorist, says, not leaving anything remaining in its place. And as I enter the archive with a renewed understanding that past, present, future are not these neatly divided segments that we were made to believe in, and that the possibility of getting over and done with might not even be available, I commit to staying, as Christina Sharp urges us to do, in the position of the wake, a position of deep hurt and of deep knowledge, thereby insisting on the ability of Black people to not only live, and I want to add create, write, and practice in subjection and as the subjected, but also, and this is from a quote from Robin Maynard, but also maintain impossible desires of freedom. And this is what makes me come back to these places. So while in my practice, I depend on the privilege that people like Paul Sebesta were afforded, the opportunity to leave their own words behind, I fight hard not to let them enlist my attention completely. There has to be more than hunting. Another example is my way of interacting with Peter Altenberg, an Austrian writer of Jewish descent who documented and fictionalized the human zoo that took place in Vienna in 1896-97. Altenberg was an avid visitor of the show that featured around 70 West Africans, and they were said to be Asante, but were most probably Ga people. He wrote a book titled Ashanti. This was published in 1897, in which Sir Peter, his alter ego, speaks about the display in the Prater Tiergarten. It's an interesting piece, a balancing act in which Altenberg criticizes the Viennese public while at the same time dwells in racist and sexist stereotypes about the Africans in the Tiergarten, especially about the women, many of them underage girls. When I first heard about the show in 2006, everything I thought that I could say was framed by this book. At the same time, I was disgusted and angered by Altenberg's writing, especially by his very strange non-positioning, which I find extremely violent. For years, I carried around a copy of Altenberg's book, convinced that I wanted to do something with it, but I didn't know what to do. So the only thing that I knew was that I didn't want to talk about the events solely based on his writing. But what I had read had left an impression. There were affects and emotions, flashbacks and hauntings. I encountered the West African performers in unexpected places. On the market, when I overheard an old man buying half a kilo of Ashantis, Ashanti being the German word for Asante, but also the Viennese word for groundnut. Then there was this one summer where Ashanti was all of a sudden the ice cream of the season in Viennese famous ice parlor called Tichy. Not to speak of the many times I would encounter photographs of the performers in exhibitions that oftentimes did not even have something to do with human zoos. Haunting indicates, as Avery Gordon says, something to be done with. And it is the something to be done with that motivates me to return to the book, because it is the only access to the people I'm really interested in, the performers. At least this is what I tell myself for a very long time. But then again, whenever I start reading, I feel so depleted by Altenberg's chatter that I have to put it away. And this is when I take the first step, getting rid of his chatter and literally fading out everything he says that is just white noise. First, I do it manually. I scratch out his words, and then I start to transfer what I have scratched out into a layout. Once I skim through the then almost empty book, a wave of relief washes over me. I read the names of the people. I repeat places and locations that hint to their possible origins. This is when I start realizing that while I use the works of Gerbes and Altenberg as entrance points, I do not have to focus on either one of them. In contrast, I become aware of the potential pitfalls that letting them hold my attention involves. I constantly need to remind myself that my practice is not about losing myself in revenge. Its purpose is not only to hunt, to go after the ethnographer. Hunting the ethnographer, the missionary, the traveler, the researcher will most probably always be part of my practice, but this is not where it ends. In fact, it's these movements between hunting and haunting, therefore the title of my presentation, between making space and attending to the affect, to the reasons of repeatedly going back to the archive that are the gatekeepers for the what could have been. And with that space that has literally opened also in this book in front of me, I start writing the script for the film, The Letter. This is from the film is from the year 2019. In The Letter, you see three empaths walking into an archive. Some viewers have also remarked that to them, the space is rather a prison. What awaits them there is a specific architecture, an atmosphere, sounds that they start hearing once they step inside. They are not searching, but moving with certainty. They know exactly what they are looking for, connections to the stories that are locked up in this particular space. One of these stories is the story of Yabole Dome, one of the West African performers in the said Human Zoo. In October 1896, she writes an open letter to the Viennese public, which I suddenly find just as if it has been waiting there for me since a long time. The letter is a statement that is both bold and outspoken. While the Viennese public might have thought that they are the only ones looking, observing, judging, Yabole Dome, too, has observed them. By way of her letter, she left an analysis that is still useful for us in the present. The empaths, the central figures in the letter, are in search for voices like Yabole Dome's. Because too long have these kind of stories only been told through the specific lens and voice of the ethnographer, the missionary, the traveler, the researcher, the archivist. And by insisting on attending to her voice, they withstand an all-too-common narration that is not able to acknowledge Black agency. And maybe in the end, this is all I'm trying to do by way of the archive, the museum. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Belinda, for that profound discussion. I am going to now introduce our last speaker, who unfortunately can't be with us on the screen. So I'll introduce her, and then Kate will be playing her pre-recorded presentation. So our last speaker is Farwa Moledina, and Farwa is a Muslim artist, and through the use of pattern and textile, her work addresses Muslim women and faith. So I'll hand it over to you, Kate.
Thank you. And I should just say, Farwa has a very quiet voice, so you may want to turn the volume up on your on your devices. I have my volume at full, and I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation.
Hello, my name is Farwa Moledina. I'm a Muslim artist interested in feminism, Muslim women and faith. I often explore these themes through the use of pattern and textile. My interest in textiles was sparked through a study of Orientalism and the Orientalist depictions of harems and women's spaces as inherently erotic. The decadent interiors found within these works led me to begin exploring the deconstruction of such Orientalist tropes and the colonial logic behind them. I use patterns and textile to directly respond to Orientalist artworks by using elements of existing artworks within the patterns I make, and I always refer to Islamic design principles when making my patterns. In this presentation, I will focus mainly on my work concerned with reclaiming the Orientalist narrative surrounding Muslim women. I'll start off by explaining why I use textile as a medium. I work with textiles for a number of reasons. Textile has evolved from being a traditionally utilitarian craft concerned with the domestic to being reclaimed by women artists. And I've always been interested in these quote-unquote traditional crafts. I was taught to crochet by my aunt when I was about 10 years old, and I often used weaving techniques to make bracelets as a child. I even had a little pink table loom, and so this form of making has always been such a big part of my identity, and that's why I felt that these sort of digital patterns were appropriate, because it was a way for me to create these contemporary reflections of traditional practices within my work. And the use of modern techniques allows for a more contextualized textile with the inclusion of figures and different elements compared to if I was working purely with yarn. The repetition involved in working with yarn is then translated into working digitally when I make my patterns, and this allows for a bridge between the traditional techniques and my contemporary responses. Before I begin talking through specific pieces, I think it's important to give a brief introduction into Islamic art and the Islamic design concepts that I use when working on my patterns. Not Your Harem Girl was designed using elements of Ang's Le Grand Odalisque, which has been criticized for its appropriation and sexualization of Eastern culture. The pattern includes a scanned-in image of an embroidery I made with the words "Not Your Harem Girl," and also an image of a hand with a henna design I made from the same text. I work in layers, so I create embroidery and henna and text that then feature in the work, and when combined, these different elements form patterns that resemble Islamic geometric art. Islamic art is fundamentally based on the concept of Tawheed, which means divine unity, and this is expressed through geometric symmetrical patterns that appear to be infinite. Designs attempt to trace the origins in creation, encouraging viewers to reflect upon them inwards, and so Islamic art promotes self-reflection and an exploration of what lies beneath the visual surface. My piece, Not Your Harem Girl, interprets these concepts within a critique of Orientalist caricatures. Central to the success of the Orientalist movement was the bastardization of inherently Islamic iconography and the Muslim female form. And so responding to and reappropriating Orientalist art is an inherently decolonial practice. Not Your Harem Girl is composed of a symmetrical geometric repeat pattern. The pattern is made from a myriad of elements, as I mentioned earlier, which are not immediately perceptible. The pattern needs to be studied and contemplated to perceive its hidden depth, which is inspired by Islamic art and the exploration of what lies beneath the immediate visual surface. This then invites the viewer to identify the different layers within the pattern and reflect on 19th century Orientalism and its prevalence in current society. The process of creating a pattern is also a form of reflection for me, always bringing me back to the concept of Tawheed and through the reclamation of Islamic design. Not Your Harem Girl was then used as a base for a couple of other series. It was initially used in my Not Your Fantasy series, which was made at the same time as Not Your Harem Girl. Not Your Fantasy is a series of textile prints concerned with reappropriating and reclaiming Orientalist imagery of Muslim women. The work is a sublimation print on polyester. The use of sublimation printing on fabric allows for a bridge between modern photography and 19th century painting. The work is composed of a Muslim woman clad in white, set within a white background. The lack of colour is crucial as it negates all exotic and erotic Orientalist stereotypes. The only element of colour within the piece is the Not Your Harem Girl fabric. And the work is embroidered with the words Not Your Fantasy, which we saw on the previous slide. The fabric printed on fabric results in a pale and imprecise reproduction of the original photograph. This creates notions of figuratively pale reproductions of Muslim women within Orientalist paintings. This helps to articulate my concern with the cultural construction and visual mediation of the Orient. The phrase Not Your Fantasy is challenging and clearly directed at 19th century Orientalist painters who created scenes of harems from their imagination and were fascinated by the otherness of the Eastern woman. To reinforce this, the woman's gaze is challenging in opposition to the vapid expressions of women in Orientalist paintings. Not Your Harem Girl was then used within another series of work I made in 2019. The series comprises two pieces, titled No One Is Neutral Here and You Must Choose Your Part in the End. The titles for both pieces are taken directly from the poetry of late Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, from the poem I Have a Seat in the Abandoned Theatre. These works are a series of digital prints on polyester. In these, an anonymous woman is photographed wrapped in the Not Your Harem Girl fabric. No One Is Neutral Here and You Must Choose Your Part in the End are photographed at the Hagia Sophia in Turkey, although that isn't made obvious. I have attempted to negate the exotic that is often associated with the East by steering away from the elaborate mosaic tiles and domes and stereotypical otherness that we are often identified with. Even though the location is not evident, I felt it was important to take the Not Your Harem Girl fabric to Turkey to photograph and place the woman within what is considered to be an intellectual space. The two images are taken beside a column and beside a window. When paired, they speak of enduring gender politics, both past and present, whilst also challenging the West's voyeuristic view of Muslim and Eastern women. I've also tried to put a greater emphasis on the textile over the architecture, and this defies traditional art historical hierarchies and works to reclaim and re-establish textile as an art form. The use of Mahmoud Darwish's poetry, as the titles, works to bring to a Western audience an awareness of the literary and artistic talent within the Middle East. The poem is significant also because it explores authorship by inviting the spectator to become the author. This prompts viewers to question their role as spectators and whether we are neutral or biased, which leads viewers to question the prevalence of Orientalist thought in contemporary society. Going forward, I would like to keep making artwork that creates more nuanced debate regarding female Muslim identity in contemporary art. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. So we have, I think, 15 minutes for discussion. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Kate, on my screen and realizing you're not seeing me. Obviously, look at you. After how many months of Zoom, you'd think that I'd be a little bit better. Anyway, what a fantastic group of artists we've had the privilege to listen to. Thank you all so much. I don't want to take up too much time, and I know academics always say that just before we launch into an excessively long soliloquy, but I really don't. I wanted to say, since Kate mentioned my book, that I have come to art history through artists, really, and you know, Belinda was kind of talking about ways into things, and the work of contemporary artists has always been the framework for me in the kind of historical work I do in the field. And that really is because I'm interested in conditions of viewership and the positions that we see from and with. And I think what all of you have done today is really ask us to think more carefully about not only where we stand, but to think about the objects that we're using to look into the past. And I'm drawing here from some Black feminist scholars like Tina Kampt, Saidiya Hartman, who's been mentioned, and Deborah Thomas, who are very much attuned to the sort of ocular centrism of art history, and particularly art history's connection to colonialism. And so they're asking us, you know, to think about what role we play as observers or as witnesses or eyewitnesses. And so I think that in the ways that these artists have all are all engaging with both historical art and the archive, this question of viewership, of our subject position, of our starting point is really crucial. And I think the other really wonderful aspect of these talks was that all of you drew out, or you elicited that cacophony that Belinda highlighted too, a cacophony that is painful and full of loss, and you allowed that space of loss to be part of the work. And I think that's another really important reason why art historians need to learn from artists in in how we engage with the archival archives and how we cultivate our own archival practice. And then the other, I think the other 2 points I wanted to make is that all of you, art history is a discipline that focuses on teleology. And what you're doing, I think, is, again, reminding us that what we're looking back at has not ended. These colonial work, these colonial histories embedded in artworks, in textiles, in the pre-Raphaelite paintings, these are histories that continue into the present. And so for me, the ways in which the frameworks that you give us are sort of akin to that art history lecture slide, where you juxtapose, right, two different objects together. It's always about, figuring out relations of form. But here, this is about actually sightlines. Right? What are we seeing when we look at these historical objects? Where are we looking? And then, really, I think the final point I wanted to make to sort of draw these together is the importance of the erotic, not as, the erotic as a set of desires, which I think reminds us of someone like Eve Tuck's idea or critique of narratives of damage, right? She talks about the erotic and desire as a way to engage with the kind of complex assemblages of experience that historical actors and subjects go through, but also the erotics of material and the way that the erotic, a la Audre Lorde, is actually a position of activism. And again, to me, what really stood out in the work of all of you and Fawa's work too was the way that, as Sunil highlighted, right, the power of culture to, as a space and as a site, as a foundation for creating real structural change. The sort of radical power of your artworks was just so inspiring, but also I think a lesson for what academics need to be doing and thinking about in our work.